Hello, my name is Andrea Gregory, and I am the Shell Analyst at Archaeological Consulting Services. Today I will be talking about Hohokam shell jewelry at Pueblo Grande. Cultural resource management investigations at Pueblo Grande have produced significant shell assemblages from off-mound areas of the site that have been subjected to systematic analyses and syntheses, including studies in support of the SR-143 and the light rail. Earlier excavations, although more challenging from a provenience perspective, offer the opportunity to compare results from contexts associated with the platform mound and adjacent non-mound areas to these more recent studies. This paper presents the results of the recent examination of these materials, referred to as the Volume 5 study in this paper, with comparisons to shell assemblages identified during previous investigations at Pueblo Grande. A total of 827 fragments of shell were analyzed for the Volume 5 study, representing a minimum of 788 individual items. The taxonomic distributions within the Pueblo Grande collection are typical of species recovered from other Hohokam sites. 3 taxa accounted for the majority of shell artifacts within the analyzed collections: Glycymeris, Laevicardium, and Olivella. These taxa typically occur in the highest frequencies within Hohokam shell assemblages, and they were also recovered in the highest numbers from previous investigations in other areas of Pueblo Grande. Although the taxa listed above made up the majority of the Pueblo Grande collection, the assemblage also contained a variety of other taxa in small numbers. Bivalves included pecten, argopecten, Spondylus comma, and Dulcinea. Gastropods were even more diverse, with Cerithidea, Conus, Necarius, Muricanthus, Oliva, Turritella, Haliotis, and Pyrene. Freshwater mollusks, most importantly Anodonta, were also identified. None of these taxa are rare in terms of their occurrence within Hohokam shell assemblages, but the breadth of taxa are typically only recovered from large habitation sites, and have all been recovered from other investigations at Pueblo Grande. Consistent with those studies, the taxonomic frequencies suggest that while occupants of Pueblo Grande may have had access to more shell species, they were obtaining shell from the same distribution network used by the greater Phoenix Basin. The Gulf of California represents the primary source of a marine shell used for jewelry identified from Pueblo Grande. The presence of Haliotis, which is restricted to ocean waters off California, indicates that the occupants of Pueblo Grande had direct or indirect trading relationships with groups associated with the California coast. Ethnographic and archaeological evidence document movement of people from the Phoenix Basin through southwestern Arizona to the Gulf of California, a route associated with autumn salt pilgrimages, but also likely with the procurement of ceramic tempering materials, obsidian, turquoise, and shell prehistorically. Autumn songs describe the salt pilgrimages as religious events where young men and older leaders journeyed from the Phoenix Basin to the Gulf of California to gather salt deposits along the northern beaches. The expedition followed established trails along routes that skirted natural watering tanks called Tinajas in the southwestern deserts of Arizona, and was not without danger, but it also provided opportunities for dreaming and acquiring spiritual powers. In addition to gathering salt, the pilgrimage was also believed to bring rain to the Phoenix Basin. Cornmeal was taken to the ocean and deposited as an offering, both in exchange for the gathered salt, as well as for the ocean wind that brought the rain. Traditional autumn Oriole songs describe portions of this journey with reference to important places on the landscape that can be used to loosely reconstruct the trail. Beginning either near the present-day settlements of Blackwater or Saskatoon in the Gila River Valley, or within present-day Phoenix, travelers headed north, and the Oriole songs describe the westward journey through the Superstition Mountains, Camelback, Tempe Butte, South Mountain, and the Estrella Mountains. Beyond the specifically mentioned mountain landmarks, the Oriole songs contain a gap until reference is made to hot water, attributed to Agua Caliente along the Gila River west of Gila Bend. And the observation that the ocean can first be seen from the top of Mount Pinacate, or Sharp Mountain, along the southern route. These stops are the last watering places for the travelers before the last leg of the journey to the Gulf of California. No water was available for the 24-hour stretch from Mount Pinacate to the ocean and back. The final portion of the Oriole songs describes spongy water, which represents the ocean shore at the Gulf of California, where salt would be collected. Once the ocean was reached, offerings of cornmeal were scattered into the waves before the salt could be collected. In addition to salt, which was treated as a crop of the sea, other items such as seaweed, shell, or pebbles were collected as a special gift from the supernatural. Throughout this journey, the travelers camped 4 times along the way. Several of the camps were associated with Tinajas, a necessity as water was extremely scarce within the landscape. It was this extreme environment that proved the most arduous aspect of the journey and contributed to the accomplishment of surviving the ordeal. Several Tinajas have been identified that likely functioned as important rest areas along the Salt Trail, including Tinaja Romero and Tinajas Altas, each of which feature Hohokam petroglyphs that contain images associated with the ocean. At Tinajas Altas, 8 separate catchment areas provide 22,000 gallons of water when full, offering a critical watering station situated within the arid environment of the southwestern Arizona desert. The importance of this area to prehistoric populations is evidenced by numerous instances of petroglyphs from a variety of groups, including Western Archaic, Hohokam, Haitian or Human, Apache, and historical O'odham traditions. Of the 335 petroglyph elements that have been identified at Tinajas Altas, some clearly represent ocean elements, including 2 fringed rectangle glyphs that resemble jellyfish, and 3 striped oval designs that mimic bivalve shells such as Laevicardium. Tinaja Romero features a Hohokam petroglyph panel with elements including what appear to be sea urchins, as well as bivalve shells and jellyfish-like elements similar to those identified at Tinajas Altas. These bivalve petroglyph images are similar to Mesoamerican representations of pecten shells. Hayden recorded 23 major and minor Tinajas within the Sierra Pinacate that had interconnecting trails and archaeological sites, including sleeping circles, trail shrines, tools, and grinding slicks. One of these, Tinaja del Toul, situated to the northeast of a ridge of sand dunes that must be crossed before reaching Adair Bay, contains Snaketown and Gila Butte phase Hohokam sherds, as well as grinding tools such as metates. Several archaeological sites in southwestern Arizona associated with prehistoric groups collectively referred to as the Papaguería display significant evidence of shell procurement and jewelry manufacture. Whether the people of the Papaguería were cultural groups unto themselves or represent outposts of Hohokam groups is still the subject of debate. It is possible that the purpose of these settlements was to facilitate and perhaps even regulate the acquisition and delivery of shell ornaments and salt to riverine communities located along the Santa Cruz, Gila, and Salt Rivers. These sites might have been staffed by Hohokam residents of the Papaguería who focused on procuring shell from the Gulf of California and manufactured finished artifacts or reduced materials to blanks for trade. A minimum of 350 bracelets were documented from the Volume 5 study, the majority of which were plain band bracelets. Glycymerous bracelets are the most common finished shell artifact type found in Hohokam assemblages. 10 decorated examples were identified and included both carved bands and umbo modifications. 4 bracelets with decorated or incised bands were inventoried and included lines that represent feather and snake motifs. Umbo modifications included incisions to raise the natural triangular umbo more prominently, carving of eyes possibly associated with a frog or snake, and an abstract incised design that may represent a stylized snake rattle. 3 methods of shell bracelet manufacture have been identified within southern Arizona and northern Mexico, producing distinctive debitage during the initial stages of manufacture. Further reduction methods are similar regardless of the initial production method. The first of these methods, attributed to the Trincheras site of La Playa in northwestern Mexico, involves deep intersecting incisions into the dome of the shell and deepening them with stone flakes. Once the central portion has almost penetrated by these grooves, the dome was tapped out, producing a rough shell ring that would be subsequently filed down. A second method of manufacture, also identified at La Playa, involved grinding the dome against an abrasive surface at a variety of angles, thinning the valve to a point where the dome could be removed more predictably with less risk of shatter. This method produced a distinctive faceted core with striations from grinding. This method was much less popular at La Playa than the scoring and percussion removal method, and these cores have been identified at shell working sites within the Papaguería and outside the Phoenix Basin. A final method, as seen in the slide here, and associated with a Hohokam based on manufacturing debris identified from Snaketown, involved wearing down the dome by grinding until the surface broke. Chipping, rasping, and reaming enlarged the hole to the desired diameter, and the final product was ground and polished. Bracelets and rings, manufactured using similar techniques, in various forms of completion, were also noted within the collections, both as unfinished artifacts and as debitage resulting from bracelet manufacture. Research and catalog collections identified within the Volume 5 study produced an example of a faceted or scored core seen in the upper left. In addition, bracelets were identified in a wider variety of manufacturing stages than documented by previous Pueblo Grande studies in other areas of the site. Examples of in-progress bracelets included items with interior grinding and pecking, as well as exterior margin pecking and smoothing, indicating a more significant involvement with shell bracelet manufacture from its initial stages. This differs from previous studies where bracelets were recovered in the final stages of production, and unfinished bracelets found at the site typically required only minimal grinding and polishing. Debitage from these previous investigations was most often recovered in the form of slivered chips, also indicative of the final stages of manufacture. The Volume 5 assemblage provides support for bracelet production from the initial stages of valve reduction through artifact completion. A total of 59 pendants were identified for the Volume 5 study, including items manufactured from cut or carved methods, as well as whole shell pendants. Pendants were most often manufactured from cutting forms from the large valves of Laevicardium, although pendants were also crafted from glycymerous, pectin, spondylus, haliotis, and freshwater Anodonta. Cut and carved designs showed a focus on water-associated animals such as frogs and toads, lizards, and birds, with sunburst and anthropomorphic forms also present. Evidence of on-site pendant production was identified from both the Volume 5 assemblage as well as previous studies at Pueblo Grande. This evidence included pendant preforms, which are geometrically shaped items without further design or perforation, as well as in-progress items. Laevicardium jewelry manufacturing evidence was identified within the Volume 5 study. One fragment of Laevicardium was identified with a snapped edge, seen in the upper right. The relative thinness of Laevicardium does not respond well to grinding or scoring and percussion removal, the typical strategies used for reducing sturdier shells such as glycymeras. Instead, twine or other tools would have been used to score Laevicardium, producing a groove which is snapped apart to remove the small shell sections for further modification. 3 distinctive fragments of Laevicardium eel or keel, 18 side margin fragments, and 4 umbo pieces were recovered, representing waste removed during pendant or other artifact production. 2 of these pieces showed evidence of working in the form of abraded edges, examples seen in the upper left and lower right, and 1 exhibited a drilled perforation, seen in the lower left. These pieces indicate that complete Laevicardium valves were being transported to the site for working, as these side portions of the shell would not have provided material suitable for formal jewelry. Because Laevicardium was recovered in all stages of production, from raw shell to initial worked and finished artifacts, occupants of Pueblo Grande were likely manufacturing Laevicardium shell jewelry on site, a conclusion also reached from previous studies at other areas of Pueblo Grande. Worked fragments of Anodonta were identified within the Volume 5 assemblage, as well as previous investigations at Pueblo Grande. Freshwater shell specimens originated from local sources such as rivers and canals. Anodonta survives only in association with certain species of fish, attaching itself to the fins of a host fish during development. The widespread presence of Anodonta in fragmentary condition at Hohokam sites throughout the Tucson and Phoenix basins is often interpreted to represent a minor element in the diet, although artifacts manufactured from Anodonta are somewhat regularly identified within large shell assemblages. Given the fragile nature of the species, worked freshwater shell would likely have been produced on site by a skilled artisan. "53 ground spire and truncated olivella beads were identified from the Volume 5 study, in addition to unworked olivella characterized as raw shell. Other gastropod whole shell beads were present in small numbers and included examples from Cerithidea, Conus, Necarius, and Pyrene. Olivella, especially in whole bead form, first became popular during the pre-classic period and increased in popularity during the classic period at Hohokam sites. Necarius whole shell beads are commonly found in significant quantities within Hohokam assemblages, as well as in northern Mexican sites such as Casas Grandes. Necarius and Conus were also recovered without modification and were considered raw shell, awaiting perforation. Other beads were manufactured from bivalves and included bilobed, cylindrical, disc, and irregular beads made from spondylus, Laevicardium, and indeterminate bivalves, as well as 1 tube bead produced from a marine worm shell. 1 saucer bead made from an olivella shell was identified. Saucer beads, which are typically constructed from olivella, are uncommon in Hohokam assemblages. Saucer beads are present in significant numbers at northern Mexican sites such as Cerros de Trincheras and Casas Grandes, as well as the California coast. A total of 14 Conus tinklers were identified from the Volume 5 analysis, with more Conus tinklers recovered from mound versus non-mound contexts. Conus tinklers exhibit a strong influence from Mexico. Within the Phoenix Basin, Conus tinkler frequencies increased during the classic period, and are most often associated with classic period platform mound sites. Conus tinklers have been linked with ritual performances, perhaps attached to ceremonial clothing, to emit distinctive sounds. 7 instances of painted shell were identified within the Volume 5 sampled collection. Both red ochre and blue azurite pigments were noted. Most of these examples occurred on Laevicardium and Glycymeris valves, with one instance located on a fragment of Haliotis. The majority of shell items with pigment were recovered from mound contexts. Consistent with other Pueblo Grande shell studies, 3 main marine taxa made up the bulk of the assemblage: Glycymeris, Laevicardium, and Olivella. Artifact forms identified from the current study were also consistent with those previously identified at Pueblo Grande, and were largely composed of Glycymeris bracelets, whole shell beads manufactured from gastropods, and Laevicardium pendants. Evidence of on-site shell manufacture of Glycymeris bracelets, Laevicardium pendants and possibly disc beads, and Olivella whole shell beads were documented for all stages of production by in-progress artifacts, reworked items, production debris, and raw shell. Additionally, evidence of working of Anodonta was also noted, although not on a significant scale. The diversity of worked material and artifact styles, as well as the presence of manufactured artifacts from fragile freshwater Anodonta, indicates that artisans were not limited to end-stage producers. The ability to craft a variety of artifact types from beginning stages indicates shell manufacturers with higher level skill sets, and the association of this production evidence with platform mound contexts suggests these craftspeople were connected in some way to special activities associated with the mound. The main contribution of the current study is the documentation of early-stage Glycymeris bracelet manufacturing evidence on a larger scale than has been identified in previous studies. Unfortunately, contexts associated with the Volume 5 study are challenging in that many of them contain materials that could not be definitively differentiated between mound or previous features such as trash mounds incorporated into the mound's construction. Even acknowledging this issue, the association of these initial stage production materials with mound contexts, or at least in proximity to what would become the mound, in particular suggests the potential relationship of more skilled artisans with the platform mound or its vicinity, as opposed to later stage bracelet manufacturing, which required less skill and appears to be more often associated with non-mound contexts. Thank you.